Hey there everybody, welcome to Tucktuk, Trinkets, and Terrain. This week's a little bit different. Me and my friends have been playing a lot of the board game Scythe recently, sort of a alternate history territory control game. But one of the spaces on the board is the factory. It gives you a special bonus if you get there, so I thought I would build a little factory to go on that piece. I think it turned out pretty well. It's all just scratch built from random stuff. So I'm going to show you what I did and how I did it, and I hope you enjoy.
Like a lot of projects, this starts off with a base made out of some chipboard that I've cut into the hex shape that the game uses, and I happen to have a single Jenga block left over, and it just so happens to be almost a perfect fit. So I decided to use it as the base of the main sort of structure that the factory is going to be made out of. I clad the Jenga block in some very thin foam. I wasn't sure if I wanted to add texture or kind of just really any direction going forward, so I figured this would be a safe bet regardless of what I ended up doing down the road. And then just hot glue that on to the base here. You can see on the front that I added some small details with some of the leftover foam. A lot of that ends up coming off for some different details down the road, but in the meantime, to add some variation for the sort of ground texture, I'm going to cut up a bit of some cross-stitch mesh, or granny grading as it's sometimes called, and just cut that to shape, glue that down, and then I put a lot of weight on it to try and avoid any warping issues. Now I wanted something for the minis of the game to stand on, and I had this piece that I had made for a different project that I ended up not using. It's just a bottle cap with a wood disc glued on, and then some just paper glued around the rim there. But to add some more detail and texture, I'm going to glue some of this very fine metal mesh onto the top here and cut that into shape. You can just get this at any home improvement store. It's what's used to cover like air vents for home stuff. I did make 2 of those. And then you can see here I've torn off that little bit of detail. And I decided to make sort of a retracting door, like a garage door, out of some cardboard with some of the paper torn off to reveal the corrugation. And then after trimming the mesh down on the little stands here, I realized that the metal was a little bit sharp, and just to make it safe, I hot glued some foam around the edges to cover those up. You can see in the background there's a 3rd disc with some gears on top. I ended up trashing that. There just wasn't enough space on the factory for a 3rd spot for minis to stand. So you'll see that floating around, but I end up not using it in the long run. Using some more of that thin foam, I created a frame for my little door on the front here. Just gluing these on and then cutting off the excess. Trying to just not measure anything and cut it to length as needed. I added some more bulk onto the back of the factory piece here with, again, just some more foam. Most of these are just offcuts that I've kept and held on to, just using up what I have lying around, which is a theme that has been throughout the last few videos of mine. I added some height on the one side here. I wanted a sort of an angled roof somewhere, and I ended up going with just a little short building here. And I just clad that with some of that corrugated cardboard to make a very simple roof on here. So this is the sort of main structure that I ended up going with, but it was time to add some details. For a lot of this, I just used what was literally on the table at the time, so cutting down some of the cross-stitch mesh, I ended up making some very accurate to scale fences, which was kind of a happy little accident. So I glued these around the top there to make some fencing. And again, using just some very small pieces of the mesh glued on to make some windows and other little tidbits of interest on the factory itself. Using some bendy straws, these make great little pipes, especially at this scale. A lot of this stuff I just glued on to give it some detail, not really thinking about purpose or what it would be if this was a actual factory. Glued on a couple of these little, I want to say capacitors, but you'll have to forgive me if that is not what these are actually called. Just some electronics parts that I've held on to for some small detail kind of stuff. And then every factory needs some smokestacks, so using some leftover bits of this plastic tubing and a couple of beads, I glued those onto the back. And then for some more details, I've used these before to make bottles for some D&D terrain, but just cut some of those in half. They're the plastic pieces in some very cheap sort of light bright toys. And then more cross-stitch meshing for some other window details along the sides of the building. I was basically just trying to cover any blank spots with something to give it some detail and interest. And then using a Y-lock trick with the hole punch to make some rivets. Obviously these are far too large for the scale of this project, but I figured it was detail that I could add. It was quick and easy. And it still looks good in the long run, so I don't mind that the scale's a bit off for these little rivets here. Again, just trying to cover up any blank spots with something. So after gluing some scrap on the bottom of my sort of bases here, you can see kind of the plan going forward for where the minis are going to sit. But I wanted to paint everything before I glued those down. So after a base coat of black, I just kept the paint scheme very, very simple. I covered everything with a layer of some gunmetal. And then I stippled on some red for the top of the smokestacks, going for a chipped paint look. And then I did a striping pattern of yellow and white for the retracting door, again trying to stipple it to give it that chipped paint look. I painted the roof as well as the little small details on the side of bronze, just to add some different color. No real goal here, just wanted to give some extra little highlights, make everything not the same, gunmetal gray. I also painted the edges of the stands in that bronze as well. I then mixed up a rust colored wash, just orange and brown paint, and just really, really heavily applied that all over everything. I wanted the corners and the recesses to be really, really rust colored, so I applied this super, super heavy. I even mixed up a browner version and dotted that randomly as well to add some color variation. And then for the last step, I just hit everything with a dry brush of some bright silver to give it that nice sort of worn metal look. And then after gluing on the little stands for the minis, this was all done. I'm really happy with how this turned out. It's not often that I make something in this scale. Even like Gaslands is a little bit larger than this, so I ended up not having room for 3 minis, but the 2 I think is fine, and you can kind of squeeze a third one on there. So you can see here with the minis themselves on the board. I think it looks pretty good. It doesn't mesh 100%, but I think it's totally acceptable. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video if you did enjoy it. Make sure to check out my Instagram. I post in-progress pictures and other things that I've got going on over there. I also have an Etsy shop where you can pick up some dungeon tiles and other terrain accessories for use in your tabletop games. The links for those can be found in the description below. But more than anything, thank you so much for stopping by. We'll see you next time.